Hey, it's Nora. Before we get started, we need to make sure that you, the listener, knows that we are not mental health professionals and not qualified to prescribe therapies or therapeutic advice. We're also not your gurus and have no aspirations in that direction. We are simply two people who are trying to feel better and do better in our lives, just like you. And now, on with the show.
Come on.
Hello.
Nora! Yes.
What? Paul? Is it Paul? It's 2 a.m. Are you okay?
I'm fine. I had this idea about the podcast. Could not wait to share it. I wanted to do an episode next week about boundaries. Hello? Hello?
Boundaries play a crucial role in maintaining healthy relationships, managing stress, and preserving our emotional well-being. In today's frantic world, many of us struggle with asserting our boundaries, often fearing conflict or rejection.
Today on the show, we're going to talk about how to cultivate the confidence and assertiveness needed to establish boundaries that honor our needs and values, so we can learn how to navigate the complexities of interpersonal dynamics with clarity, compassion, and resilience.
So, if you're ready for takeoff,
let's go. Okay, Nora, today on the show, we are talking about boundaries.
yes. Also, Paul, I'm impressed because the past 2 takes, you got my name wrong. You called me Dork.
I don't know what you're talking about, Dora.
That's a boundary. My name is Nora.
Okay. Good. First boundary established in the podcast.
Yes.
That's what we needed right away. We needed our first boundary established. Anyway, tell me about boundaries from your perspective.
Well, first off, I've been, throughout time, as I've grown and as I've matured, well, that is suspect.
It makes you sound like an eternal being right away.
No.
Throughout time.
Throughout the ages. No, really what I'm trying to say is as I age, boundaries become more and more crucial, and I understand how imperative they are for all relationships, including with myself, first and foremost. So I think it's important that we talk about it. Also, real quick, I just want to say that I am coming down from a head cold, so if I sound a little gross or nasally, that's why. Excuse me. So forgive me.
Well, you're already forgiven.
Needed that.
Nobody would have noticed.
I needed to be absolved by Paul.
Okay.
Paul, why do you want to talk boundaries?
Well, I think they're just as important as you do, and I think in my development, certainly through different relationships I've had, both romantic, personal, and work relationships. They all taught me different things about the necessity of boundaries, and how they actually reduce your stress level, and they just make for a much cleaner, fairer existence for everybody around you too. It's just it's important to have them on a lot of different levels, and we're gonna talk about all those levels today, which I'm unreasonably excited about.
Yeah.
I love the topic of boundary setting, and I love to set boundaries. And we'll also talk about some of the pitfalls that can happen with them.
Yeah.
Are you setting a boundary, or are you just an avoidance of something that's unpleasant? That kind of thing.
I think it's about like the learning and unlearning of boundaries, right? It's learning boundaries and unlearning, like whether it's people-pleasing tendencies or anything like that. It's a lot of unthreading in order to establish boundaries for successful relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe we should say right off the top, a lot of boundary setting is predicated on the fact that you have that you have a healthy self-respect as well, and that you think you deserve, you deserve to have the things that you need, in your life in terms of boundaries. But that does take a certain level of self-respect to get over that you're worthy of setting boundaries,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's get into it. We're going to talk about the types of boundaries that people commonly set and that we set. And why don't you kick it off with the personal/energetic boundary there?
Yeah, personal and energetic. To me, this type of boundary is mostly communicated through body language and words, of course. Have you ever been around a person or a group of people that you don't really, quote unquote, vibe with?
No, I always vibe with everybody.
Everyone. Just me then?
It's just you that I don't like hanging out with.
Exactly. Or do you ever feel like a person's emotional need for constant validation?
Yeah.
That's like exhausting, right?
Yeah.
It's just, it's impossible. It's draining. And I leave those encounters needing a lot of space and quiet time for myself in
Yeah.
order to fill my energy back up. So that's what I mean with like an energetic vibe that needs an energetic boundary. There are the people that are like they're like the psychic vampires as well as we'll call them. You know, when
Yeah,
they
we
come
all know
into
about energy. I call them energy vampires, but same
yeah,
thing. Yeah,
they're like
yeah.
the Debbie Downers that walk into a room, or they just like it's that black cloud that follows people that they
Yeah.
just need the validation from other people. And yeah,
I used to work with this guy, Dave, who was he was a sound designer for the theater I worked at, and his nickname was the problem with that is because he'd always come into a meeting and everybody would be like, okay, we're gonna do it. And then Dave would be like, the problem with that is, and we're like, ah, it's just like the Debbie Downer sketch. I'm sure they might have modeled it on him. I'm not sure.
oh
Yeah.
man,
Anyway, I agree with you. I don't think most people put high enough energy high enough on their priority list in terms of protecting it. You know, protecting your energy is so important if you want to have peace in your life, because we're a pretty exhausted country, right? And most of the time, I think that comes from all of us not doing a good enough job at setting boundaries around our energy. And one of the greatest revelations in my 30s was that I didn't have to lend my voice to every exhausting conversation that I was asked to be a part of, right? I could just not play the game, and it felt freaking amazing. You know?
yeah. There's something that I do. You know, when so the more aware that I become of that, like I go into situations now with a lot more awareness of like my own energy, which
Yeah.
is that's like grace. That's like extending grace to people is just being aware of your own energy.
Yes.
And even if you're like low energy around people, I make sure when I'm feeling like lower energy that I tell other people like this is how I'm feeling right now. It has nothing to do with you or the situation, or I like kind of separate myself until I can fill myself back up in order to kind of extend more of myself to people without it depleting me. But I think it would be really what's the word I'm looking for? Graceful, I guess, for people to be more aware of the energy they bring and to be
Yeah,
responsible for the energy they bring to every situation and every
yeah,
encounter.
for sure. People's energy just can change an entire room, you know. And the thing that you're talking about, I think the way that I take it anyway is that it's a kindness to set boundaries sometimes like that. Not sometimes, all the time.
Yeah.
It's a kindness to everybody because when you set one, then people are clear on what you need. They
Yeah.
don't have to guess. And then and then you also have something to refer to if that boundary gets crossed. You know, we've already had this conversation. I told you I needed this, and then it didn't happen. So let's talk about that, and let's
Or
it's
even
so
like
much
an
better.
energetic boundary that I like sometimes like realize that someone's trying to pull me into that like have you ever been in line at a store and like someone in line is just being impatient, like they're becoming impatient that they have to wait and they're like just like doing this like looking at
Shifting
everyone
from
like
foot to foot,
shifting
and
from foot to foot and
looking
looking at
around to see
other
if there's
people
another checker coming. Yeah,
or
that
even
kind of thing.
looking at other people in line to be like, look how, bad. Like they want to
Yeah.
pull you into the energy of being
Yeah, yeah,
impatient. And
yeah,
I
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
every time I see that, I'm like, I just go stone face and it's like,
Yeah.
no MFer. Like
No, no, not.
you're not pulling me into this shit, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like
Yeah.
you're not breaching my energy here. So
I find that when I'm out and about where I live now, which is different than where I grew up in Oakland. Yeah, I grew up in East Oakland to be specific. All right. And now I live temporarily.
mess with
I'm temporarily living just above Sacramento, where there's let's say a more conservative bent to things up here. And I often will find myself, people will assume, since I'm another white guy, that they can just use casual racism around me all the time. And that's like a super
awful. That's a
hard
hard
boundary for me. So I do the same thing, just be like stone faced, man. I'm just like, I don't understand what you're talking about. Can you elaborate? They'll have some kind of dog whistle thing in there. And I'll be like,
I make them.
oh, I don't
make them
understand what you're talking
explain
about.
themselves, too.
Yeah,
Yep.
totally, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Like I
I
don't
mean,
get it.
it's not to needle them, but it's more to set a subtle boundary where I can't say, it's the guys I don't know. These
Yeah.
are guys like in the grocery store and stuff,
Yeah.
And you can't really, they're not going to understand it if you say, I need to set an energetic boundary here around this conversation.
Right.
They'd be like, what are
Right.
you talking about? Right. So instead, I just sort of blank out or make them explain themselves, and then they just peter out after.
My therapist gave me this really cool practice, and it's probably helped with people, especially when it comes to like Thanksgiving meals. When people are just like walking into just energetic minefields.
Yeah.
People they have to be around. She was saying before you enter a situation that you feel like you're going to be in, what I'm just going to call an energetic minefield.
Yeah, you're going to be
Just-
triggered.
Yeah, just picture yourself like before you walk in, like your bound, like your aura, your energy, and pretend to just like zipper up over yourself, right? as
Yeah.
like can't penetrate this bubble of awesomeness. So
Yeah.
like yeah, so I kind of dig that. I like that idea of like the invisible shield.
Yeah, those things are those mental gymnastics are super helpful sometimes when you're going in a situation like that. You just be like, nope, I'm in my pea pod or
Yep.
whatever you're doing. I'm in my energetic onesie.
Exactly.
Stay away from me.
I like it. Energetic onesie. I dig
Yeah.
that.
All right. So
All right.
that is our personal / energetic boundaries. Now we're going to move on to physical boundaries, which are vastly different for different people,
Yeah.
and we're going to see that in a second here. But to me, it can refer to my body or my living space, and I have boundaries for both of those things. And I have personal physical boundaries as well, but they don't come up as much for me because as a man, people aren't going to come up and just think they can touch me most of the time and think that, whereas being a woman, that happens all the time.
Yep.
But mine are more like personal boundaries for myself. So there are things like I don't eat junk food or sugar. I don't skip exercise or meditation. I don't judge my body by society's standards. And then some of my physical space boundaries are I don't leave dishes in the sink overnight. I don't let clutter build up. And if a new thing comes into my space, then an old thing has to go away. Now, having said those things, I fail at them constantly. Okay. So that's the other thing about the boundaries you set with yourself, especially.
You have to keep resetting them.
You get not resetting or revisiting, yeah. But I mean, the important thing is to like, this is not an excuse to be another excuse to beat yourself up and tell yourself you're not a good person because you violated one of your own boundaries. Man, sometimes we're just tired and we can't do it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't watch any violence on television usually, but yesterday I was so tired. I watched an episode of House of Ninjas on Netflix, and I'm not sorry. It was awesome, but there was a lot of violence in it. And, I crossed that boundary. So now I got to revisit it and say, why did I do that? Like,
Right.
what was in me that I couldn't have the strength to not do that or whatever? It doesn't matter, but I'm not beating myself up about it. And that's important that you don't either when you set a boundary, a
Yes,
personal
I
boundary
agree.
like that.
I agree with that. You gotta let it go.
Yeah. What about physical boundaries for you?
Yeah, as a woman, my physical boundaries are like imperative to me. One of my top values is the feeling of safety. Like I value safety, and in the past, my physical boundaries, especially when I was in like my 20s, my physical boundaries were too often infringed on, and always left me feeling like violated and ragey. I hated going to like regular stupid bars as a 20-something-year-old with like friends. Like I had friends that would want to be like, oh, let's go meet up so and so at a bar, and I always hated it because it was always filled with these just idiot guys that just would violate my space. And like I've had my butt grabbed, I can't even, like, so many times in public spaces. Like I'm not proud of this, but I punched some dude in the side of the head one time for grabbing my ass at a bar. We both got thrown out, but yeah, there's just like all sorts of physical boundaries that, like with my body, you are not allowed to touch it unless I consent to that. And that is like a boundary for me.
It kind of surprises me, Nora, because I find you terrifying. I would never try to touch you without permission. Even when I didn't know you, I found you terrifying.
But there was always like someone who it felt like it was it's a power move. It's a power move. I had a guy one time just put his like hand on my leg. I didn't know him, and I was like, "Remove your hand from my leg," and he said no, and I was like, "Oh, that's funny. If you don't remove your hand from my leg, I'm gonna get the bouncer to do it, and if he doesn't, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to throw you out on your head first." So it makes me livid when that shit happens. Yeah. Anyway, my physical boundaries, again, like I said, people are not allowed to touch me unless there is like I consent to that. And then also boundaries with my home. Like I don't let strangers into my home, especially if I'm by myself. No way. It's like I value my privacy, the boundaries in my home, and I make sure that any guest that I have in my home respects my space and my belongings and my So those are the two I can think of the most. But,
Yeah, I get that, and I'm so sorry that happens to you and to everyone on the planet.
It really.
I mean, it's just like it's stuff that we don't have to think about, and I can't imagine the stress level then to have to think about that every day, every time you leave the house. You're just thinking about your safety first all the time. How stressful?
I mean,
is
that's
that?
the thing. We live in a deeply unsafe society for women, so it's a survival mechanism, really.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, on that wonderful note.
All right, we're going on to emotional protection, protecting our own emotional well-being. And This one was really important to me, and I learned in my 20s because having been in, I talked about being in an emotionally abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Last episode, but I learned that in that relationship, having been in an emotionally abusive relationship in my 20s, it was an early boundary that I set, and sometimes it's not an easy one because, as with everything in life, this is what I said in the intro. This one comes back to your sense of worthiness and your capacity for self-love, right? And it's very difficult to set an emotional boundary against a manipulative or abusive behavior unless you think yourself worthy of something better. And a lot of people in that situation don't think of themselves worthy for something better than that. And
Yeah.
I didn't either for a long time. And then when I started to get myself, that relationship destroyed me for like at least a year afterwards, probably longer than that. And I didn't get it back. I didn't get it back for a long time. I didn't get my groove back for a long time because I didn't feel like I was worth it. And then once I got that back, and I promised myself the next time I would be pretty clear that I wasn't to be treated like that.
Yeah. That's a
again.
huge learning.
So,
I feel like
yeah.
if we don't learn those lessons, they keep coming back for us.
Oh, they're just
right?
well, that's what the universe gives you, right? It just
Yeah,
keeps giving you the
like
same lesson
patterns.
until you learn it, and then it goes on to the next lesson.
Yeah,
right?
it's like you
So,
don't
I
have a
mean,
type, you have a pattern,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Exactly
Yeah.
it. It's yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you had that relationship. There's part of me that wonders, like, is this just part of the process when you're young and like in your early relationships?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's all school, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's the thing. I'm not sorry about it. I mean, it was a real bummer at the time, and I really did lose a lot of self-confidence and self-worth. But the building back up of that is the upside of the process, right?
Well, I
I
got his
mean,
groove
sure.
back.
It went right. It didn't kill me. I was
Right.
really bummed out for a while. I was very depressed, and and I was also broke at the time, which was not great. So it was a lot of whammies all at one time. But like resilience is it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, resilience is the whole game because you're going to get knocked down, and if you're resilient, you can get back up from it. And it taught me a lot of resilience going through that whole thing because there's a lot of crap happening all at one time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I try to look at it all like it's just life university, man. You know?
Yeah. I feel like as we build self-awareness, if we are aware of it,
Yeah.
and as we develop our emotional IQ, some folks with lower emotional intelligence have a hard time distinguishing their own emotions from other people's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have someone that relies on you suffering along with them,
Yeah.
it's like that. I feel like the self-awareness is key of like being able to identify your own emotions and your own opinions, and developing that sense. Because in relationships like that, like I was in a relationship like that where he required, like when he was upset or angry about something, if I wasn't, didn't feel the same way, he would like get upset and pissed at me as if like I didn't care, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, oh well, I would kind of absorb that.
Right.
And it was just, it was terrible. It was detrimental. So it's again going back to the whole observe, don't absorb.
I was just going to say that.
Right.
That's one of my favorite quotes of yours now. Observe, don't
Right.
absorb. Yeah.
It's like it's easy to take on an emotional response about a person or a situation without realizing the other person's emotional influence on us, right? So
Yeah.
it's really important to make that distinction and have that self-awareness and develop that self-awareness about how you actually feel, where the boundary is that kind of emotional boundary is it distinguishes where you end and the other person begins, right? So otherwise you're just taking on their emotions without,
Right.
it's manipulative in a way without even recognizing it.
Yeah. I had less of that, but that was definitely in there. And I didn't know anything. My early 20s, I didn't really know anything about attachment or detachment from that. And I would definitely, because I'm a very empathetic person, you know
Right.
me, and I tend to absorb all that stuff.
Yeah, me too.
That's the thing. And so observe, don't absorb is a really great thing for me. Even
it's
now
huge.
in my 50s, I
Yeah.
still remind myself, I don't get, don't get in the whirlpool, just
Same.
you can stand outside of it, you can do it.
Because you end up just being reactive all the time, right?
Right,
It's
yeah.
like you just end up reactive along with everyone else. It becomes like
It's not good for anybody. It's not good for you or for your loved ones.
Yeah, it's
And
like a hive mind in a yeah.
Yeah, it's a groupthink thing. Yeah, for sure.
Completely.
Yeah.
Anyway, should we move on to time boundaries?
Time. Yes.
Oh yeah, this is one of my biggest issues, I think, with my time. With in holding those boundaries, I am constantly trying to work on this. But
Yeah.
like people prioritizing their time and needs over mine. That's like a thing. That's a total
Yeah.
thing.
That is a total thing.
Yep. If someone has asked me for help or wants to call me in order to flesh some things out, often I'll need to tell them how much time I have allotted to their needs. Otherwise, they're just going to suck up so much of my time. And I have
Mm-hmm.
I feel there's the part of me that feels honored that like someone is looking for my opinion or my direction or, something from me in order to like help guide them in some way. But
Right.
a lot of times it just like becomes a complete time suck. And then I'm left with nothing. And then I'm, overcommitted and then I get resentful. So that's good.
Yeah, I'm thinking about all the texts that I've ever received that said, "Do you have a minute?"
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and
I
you just
know
go,
all about
"Oh
this.
my god," and then they take an hour of the time that
Yeah.
you don't have anyway, right? So now
Yep.
when people ask me that, I do what you do, right? I say I have 10 minutes at this specific time,
Yeah.
and then I hold them to that time limit, and people are shocked, when you do that to them. Like no, people don't set that time boundary very often because you can tell by the reactions. It's like when I'm like, okay, that's time's up. I gotta go,
go.
or
Right.
whatever. They're like, okay. I'm like, not a minute more. No,
Right.
because I said 10 minutes. And it sounds like I'm being a hard ass about it, but this is what some boundaries are, right? And if you live up to them, then there you go. I call them clock poachers, right? The old clock poachers are waiting for you, right? They're waiting to take your time away.
All I can think about is that Chappelle skit with the wrap it up button. That's what I need. It's like I 100%
Totally.
under like wrap it up, G.
Yeah, wrap it up, G.
Start
I gotta
playing
go.
the music on what is it, the Oscars or whatever
Yeah,
it is. Like,
the playoff music. Yeah. Oh, they
Exactly.
played him
Wrap
off.
it
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
yeah, it's but yeah, people will infringe on time. That's like such a thing for me, and I'm still working on it. And again, it's like I deeply care about so many of my friends and family that are always looking, but sometimes it's just it's it's too much and it detracts from time with like my husband who
Yeah.
sometimes I don't get enough time with him and then it makes him feel undervalued, so
Yeah.
it's those boundaries are very important, especially.
Yeah, man. I believe we're not here to work as much as we do either. That at our jobs, by the
thank
way,
you.
we're here to live, and there's a lot of that. That ethos in America of just that grind culture is just so exhausting to me. And I'm not
Yep.
saying that it's wrong if you're doing it, but
Right.
for me, that amount of time and that amount of energy focused on one point to the exclusion of all else seems like not the way that I'd like to live.
Yeah, and I'll say the thing with time stuff too, and it can bleed into the professional like boundaries, which we'll get into as well. But like a lot of those coincide, that
Yeah.
there will always be bosses and managers and clients that will just require more and more time from you. And it's like they're just going to milk everything they can out of you for the the cheapest cost. So
Right. I mean, that's because we're not going to go into
we
it,
won't
but
go into it.
that's corporate culture for you,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
exactly.
it's about the bottom line. It's about the shareholders, and it's not about the workers. And we as a nation suffer for that.
Yes, we do.
There you go. All right. Let's not get too far into that. Let's get
Yeah.
on to spiritual boundaries, protecting our beliefs and faith. There.
Yeah, so I don't engage with people who seek to debate me about my spiritual beliefs. Like a lot of times when someone will ask me a question and I sense from them that they're really not interested in actually hearing what my take is on it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'll actually ask, are you asking to understand, or are you asking to debate? I'll
Yeah,
straight
right.
up ask them that, because if
Yeah.
it at least clarifies, like, I will talk to you if you're coming from an open mindset of like hearing my personal truth. And I don't expect everyone to have not everyone's going to have the same personal truth as me. And
Of
that
course.
applies to spirituality. Like,
Yeah, no one is.
right. I just require that people respect that I have a personal truth or personal truths, and theirs might be different and I respect theirs. But yeah, so I only discuss with people that I sense from them or that I hear from them that they're seeking to understand where I'm coming from in the spiritual conversations that we have. But I
Yeah,
will
it's
say, go
go
ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's so funny that you get into those conversations. Like nobody ever baits me into those conversations. I mean, it just never comes across my table. Maybe it's the people I hang out with or whatever. I mean, they may ask me something about that, and I'll be, well, the Hindus would say this about it, and the Buddhists would probably say this about it, and the mystic Christians believe this about it, whatever.
Right.
But I completely leave myself out of it, and I think. Because of that, for me, not every boundary I set is with another person spiritually, right? Sometimes I set the boundaries with myself. Like against my baser instincts, about like
Right.
watching that violent thing yesterday, right? Like I don't watch violence on television, or I won't compromise my spiritual beliefs when it's convenient or profitable or pleasurable for me to do so.
Right.
Right. And that can be helpful if you find yourself lapsing in what feels comfortable at the expense of your faith all the time.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, it's okay. I mean, yesterday, like I said, I'm not kicking myself for doing that, watching that violent show yesterday. But at the same time, you got to keep an eye on it.
Right.
Because if I start binging that and then I go, oh, that was good, I'm going to go on to the next violent show and start binging that, then that starts letting stuff in your sense doors that's going to change the way you think.
It comes down to the
things.
awareness, right?
It comes down to the awareness. That's
like
it.
Always what it comes down to.
That's
right?
it. The being unaware is the road to hell, really. I mean, for the
Right.
most part, right? You're laying a trap for yourself if you're unaware of what you're engaging in all the time. But if you can engage mindfully in something like watching that TV show, like I knew what I was doing. It wasn't just lazy. I knew what I was doing when I did it. I don't think it affects you as much. That's
Right.
I'm not gonna give myself license to, like I said, go and binge 10 series. But at the same time, I'm not going to get too far down on myself for watching one and
Yeah.
taking the afternoon off from reading the Bhagavad Gita or whatever,
Well, it's funny because I have all these boundaries and I still watch Jersey Shore with delight. So
Well, there you go. Yeah. I mean, there you go.
No,
as long as it's with delight and you
it
know
is
what you're
with
doing. That's what
delight.
I'm saying. It's awareness, though. It's awareness
It's
of
total awareness. It's like
Yeah.
it's I don't put stock in. It's not like I want to be anyone on the cast, and there's
Right.
just this. I'd really have to sit and think of why that show delights me. It's actually pretty funny if you watch it.
I don't know. I have never seen it, but
I know,
I can
but
imagine.
you know what? I will say
Yeah.
this, Paul. Kevin, my husband, like when that show first came out years ago, I remember he saw like 2 seconds of it and he was like, what is this? And he was like, these people don't exist. This is ridiculous. These people don't exist. And he of course, grew up in the Midwest. We were living in
Yeah, yeah.
Chicago at the time. I grew up on the East Coast, right outside of Philly. I went to the Jersey Shore like every summer of my childhood. And I was like, oh, you are so wrong. These people absolutely exist. There's no Midwest equivalent of this, right? And
Yeah.
like, there was a sense of, I think maybe that's it. There's a sense of familiarity about these people. And
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
so maybe that's it. I don't know. But
Yeah, well, I went to graduate school in Delaware, so there was a lot of people
Yeah.
from Jersey going to University of Delaware. That's where a lot of girls from Jersey went, was
Yeah.
down to Delaware to go to college, right? And so a lot of people in general, not just girls, but
to be fair, a
yes.
lot of the Jersey Shorecast are from New York. So I was just going to say
oh, well,
that.
there you go. Yeah. Well, hey,
Anyway.
there you go. I did watch. I forgot this, but I did watch one episode one day by just nothing else was catching me of Floribama Shore, because I
Oh,
was like,
God,
really?
yeah.
Did you ever watch that one?
I think
Oh,
that
my
it doesn't
God.
hold weight. It doesn't like the casting just was not the same as Jersey Shore. But anyway,
Was
it
it
good?
I
Do
don't.
you like
I
it?
don't.
Did you find it
No,
delightful?
I didn't like it. I thought it should be called Young People with Alcohol Poisoning. Is
there
what
is
it
that.
should be called. I mean, it was
There
just
is
like
that.
young people making bad decisions and getting alcohol poisoning. That's like the whole premise of the
that's
entire.
Jersey
Oh, and
Shore as
fighting.
well. Yeah,
Fighting.
and that is
Yeah,
also
yeah.
Jersey Shore. But
A
yes,
lot of
totally.
violence. Yeah, ridiculous.
that's
All right,
too
let's
funny.
get out of this quagmire,
All
can we?
right. Yeah.
All right.
Let's move
Hey,
on.
you had a story you were going to add to this
Oh,
one.
yeah. So this might like fall, it kind of falls under the spiritual boundaries, but it also maybe energetic boundaries. I don't know. It's kind of the crossover of two. But so I find myself like very, like I feel people's vibes. Let's just put it that way. Like I'm very in tune with the energy that people are bringing. And I might not know exactly the details of what someone's going through, but like I can walk into a room and sense what people are like, what moods they're in, or like what their pain is and what their joy is, and like where they are. It's I don't know if it's like a survival mechanism that I developed over time or what, but I definitely have it.
Yeah,
Anyway.
you and I both have that.
Yeah.
We talked about that before. Yeah.
Just this past weekend, I was in New Orleans, which I freaking love that city, like many, many people do. It's so great. Anyway, there's in Congo Square there. If you don't know what Congo Square, the significance of Congo Square to me, to many people is a sacred ground. Really, it's a park that is like the beginning of the Treme neighborhood, and it's the place where the original indigenous people used to have like their marketplaces there, and I think I don't know if they did trading, but they would do their harvesting there. But anyway, during the era of slavery, it was the one place that the enslaved were able to go on Sundays and basically practice their religions or their spiritual practices, I should say. as well as play their drums and like dance and stuff. And it's considered to be like the birthplace of American music, really, and jazz and blues and spirituals and all that. Anyway, there's this the park has these like incredible live oak trees and magnolia trees there. It's really beautiful. And there's this one oak tree that every time I've been to New Orleans, the first time I came upon it, I was like, holy crap, this is a special tree. And I've told people about it. I've said like there's a tree there that feels sacred. I've literally said that. Anyway, we were going through Congo Square, and I had my two girlfriends were with me, and we went to go see the tree. And I had been there before, and like people leave offerings at this tree, and I've seen like coins in it, and so I just thought
like in the bark,
in the bark,
in the
yeah,
bark?
like people leave stuff in the bark or at the bottom
Yeah.
of the tree near the root systems, and it's like a 400-year-old tree, so it's magnificent, it's huge.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were there and we were going to leave an offering at the tree, and my friend Mary had pulled out a penny and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to leave an offering." And she went over to the tree, and as she went over to put the coin in the tree, there was a woman there who I think was giving a tour, who I'm pretty sure like practiced Santeria. She was, by what we kind of figured that by what she was wearing and her head wrap. And we heard from her, "Please do not put coins in my ancestor's sacred tree." And so we were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, of course." And she, my friend Mary said, "Can you tell us what an appropriate offering would be?" And this woman, like very clear, like the energy I felt from her was just intense, like in this way that I just like, I don't even know how to describe it. I didn't even like, I've never felt this from someone before. She turned to us and she looked at us and she said, "Are you saying you want to leave an offering for my ancestors and their sacred tree?" And we said, "Yes." And when she said that, like she turned towards us, it felt like this tsunami of just boundaried power coming from
Wow.
her. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like I just felt that, like this energy from it. It wasn't like a bad feeling. It was like this is a boundary, and also I'm asking you something to see how genuine you are. Because I'm sure she's seeing white women at this tree that are like, and so I said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm asking again, do you want to leave an offering to my ancestors in our sacred tree?" And I was like, and I was trying to reflect back to her the best I could in my energy of like nothing but love and respect. And yes, this is what we'd like to. And like, we were both like, yes. And then she just said, "You may leave." And she said like corn. I can't remember all the things, but one of the things was flowers. And so we were like, "Okay, thank you." And there were azalea bushes that were surrounding, and there were a few azalea flowers on the ground. So I picked up 3 flowers, so me and my friend Mary and her sister could leave an offering. But it was just such this intense energy and like spirituality. I felt like I don't know how to explain it other than that, but it really deeply impacted me in a way that I was like, whoa. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, incredible.
That's how to set a boundary without setting a boundary out loud, right? I mean, she was just like, all she had to do was turn
100%.
around on you, and you were just like, "I get it."
Everything about her energy. It wasn't anything she said specifically. It wasn't even like, her body. It was just the way she asserted herself, and the energy that she exuded was so deeply powerful. And I just was like, I was trying to exude back to her to show her like, we're not coming here from ego. We're coming here. We want to respect this. And it's interesting too, because it really just, I've talked about this tree, about it like being sacred, and I didn't know the history of that. And it felt really like it really threw me, because it's something that I sensed about that tree in that space that was confirmed when she said that. So I was like, whoa, crazy.
What a great thing.
That was amazing.
I wish that happened to me. I'm jealous. I'm jello of
it was pretty nuts. I'm still trying to process it and like really that experience, but yeah, and try to explain it to people, but people don't really quite understand what I'm talking about, because I'm like, I don't know how to.
Well, those experiences, you can't really explain
it's personal,
them. I mean,
right?
they're just felt. Yeah, they're just personally felt.
It was definitely a personal truth that I felt that. Well, I'll just say that.
Gotcha.
Anyway, we shall move on.
We shall move on to sexual protection. I don't know why I sang it. Protecting our needs and safety sexually is what we're talking about.
Okay.
I don't know why I did that.
Marvin Gaye over here.
No, not even that. No. I don't even know what I was singing. I wasn't even trying to do anything.
I think for when it comes to the sexual boundaries, all we got to say, Enthusiastic consent. Yeah.
Enthusiastic consent.
And also, I got this from was it Taylor Tomlinson? She's a young
Comic.
Yeah, she's a
Yeah,
comedian.
yeah.
I was watching one of her stand up, and one of the things she said, I was like, oh man, homegirl nailed it. She was talking about basically sexual boundaries in some sense, and she was saying, yes, and consent is words that come out of someone's mouth, not what you think they should be. And that is
Right,
it
yeah.
exactly. It is
Yeah.
open, clearly communicated.
Yeah.
And hands down.
Yeah. And
That's
of course, consent, as every woman will tell you, is sexier than anything else you can do
right?
a lot of the time, right?
Seriously.
Consent is sexy.
And,
So
like,
if you're thinking it's not,
enthusiastic consent, not like a
Yeah,
maybe,
exactly.
like
No,
if it's
yeah,
a
yeah.
maybe or whatever, then just stop.
Yeah.
Just stop what
Yeah.
you're doing, because
Exactly.
it has to be enthusiastic, confident consent. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they're not sure. So yeah.
Well, speaking of clear communication, we're on to communication, which is expectations about how and when you will communicate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to set boundaries with people to signal how and when you communicate. And for instance, if you have
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. What were we going to say?
No, I was just gonna say, what do you mean by that? Go ahead.
Like if you have a friend who calls you at like 2 a.m. to chat and you're sleeping, and it's not an emergency, no one's like bleeding out, then or if they don't know how to talk to you without yelling at you or calling you derogatory names, then you'll benefit from telling them how you'd like to be addressed. And in what tone and what time and what's appropriate, and that's it. Like you have to communicate. You have to know your needs in order to clearly communicate them to people. And it's kind of, you teach people how to treat you. Essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And and what you'll accept and what you won't. Like I have a real serious boundary around gossip of any kind. Like I used to work in some offices that were, some environments that were like high pressure environments. And in those environments, a lot of people will just kind of lazily fall back on gossip and things to make their day, I don't know, more bearable, or I don't know what it is. But I just think gossip is like a slow drip of poison to the heart, and I had a friend and colleague who just loved to spill the tea about everyone and everything, from celebrities to their next door neighbor to work colleagues. And I just had to set an early boundary with this person around gossip before it started taking an effect on me, and I'm glad I did. And ever since then, in every work environment I've ever been in, if somebody's gossiping, I just either remove myself from that, or if I can't remove myself, I say, hey, you should really talk about that with that person, or whatever.
Also, like people who gossip signify to me people who I can't trust with my
because they're going to be doing it about you later, for sure.
Exactly. Like if it's like a breach of trust automatically. Like I know not to share with them, not to be
I'm in sort of a light business relationship with somebody who has that tendency now, and I just don't say anything around that person usually about anything, and then because I just know it's going to get gone through the mill and regurgitated in a way that I don't
it's
really
just, it's
won't really
energy,
like.
Man. It's just
it's low vibe energy. It really for sure. It really is. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll move on to professional.
Yes. Professional. Yes, indeed. This is professional boundaries, man. This is why I cannot work for micromanagers. I mean, I can't work for anybody really. I'm not a very good employee. I'm a much better self-employed person. I mean, I can be for a limited amount of time, but then it's just overwhelming to me. I just got to get out of here, And this is one of the reasons, right? I need a level of autonomy and peace in order to function at my best, right? So, I mean, you hired me to do a job, then you need to trust me to do that job until there's evidence that you can't trust me to do that job. And then we need to have a conversation about it, right? But if you need to give me the chance, you need to give me autonomy and peace, and let me take a whack at it. And then if I'm not living up to it, we can have that conversation. So I learned very early that I shouldn't probably reply to ads that require you to quote unquote thrive in a fast-paced environment.
Yes.
or it's just code for we're gonna wear your ass out with the disorganization of this company and micromanaging you to death. Oh, and also there's gonna be lots of overtime.
Yeah,
so that's what that's
that you're not
code
going to get paid for, right?
Right, that you're probably not going to get paid for, but we might give you a stock option for 0.25% after 5 years.
Or like, we're a family here. Or no,
you're not.
No, we're not.
No, you're not.
We are coworkers.
You're a machine.
Exactly.
You're a cog. I'm a cog. We're different cogs.
You're a family
we do the same
until you're
stuff.
an employee and getting fired for
cut
because you got the shareholders need their money or all that.
Sorry,
nonsense.
fam.
No, yeah. Yeah, I hate that stuff. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, amen to that. And if I'm getting paid less than someone for doing the same work, that, and especially if they've come on after me, then I'd like,
After, yeah.
I'm having a conversation real quick with my manager or my boss, and if they're not like up in my salary, it's that whole like, what is it called? Shoot, what is it called? Hold on. It is the loyalty tax. I think that's what it's called. When like businesses hire on other people for the position that you've been in like for 3 or 4 years and working your ass off. And then
Yeah.
they hire on people at like a higher wage than when you're getting paid. I'm like, I'm
Uh-huh.
out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's
I like that. The loyalty tax.
yeah,
I like
I
that.
couldn't
Yeah.
remember the name of it, but yeah, the loyalty tax. Yeah, there was like when I was, for 8 years, I worked at this completely insane environment. I was basically it was a dog kennel, a boarding and daycare facility with grooming for like really wealthy people in the Chicagoland area. And the two people that worked the front, like the client facing role, were me and this other woman. We were open 7 days a week, and like the minimum was like 10-hour days and the maximum was 12-hour days. So we worked all the time. And I would work until 7 p.m. and literally like almost every day there were always people running late to pick up their dogs, whether it was from like daycare or boarding. And like, I would give like the 10-minute flexibility quite often where it was like, all right, but I wasn't getting paid overtime ever. The amount of people that would like call and be like, I'm running for my dog. And we also had like pickup and delivery services for like $10 that you could like get your dog delivered to your home and whatnot.
Yeah.
They would refuse to use it. And then every time they would run like a half hour late. And it just infringed on my time and on my husband's time all the time. It was just absolutely insane where it was like, all right, I got to the point where it was like, if you're not here by this time, we're boarding your dog another night.
Or your dog is now boarding.
We have food here. We have like, but people didn't understand that they weren't a one-off. This was literally every night. And like the amount of extra hours I put in was insane.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have a time bound, or I needed to have a better time boundary.
Yeah.
I learned quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but ultimately the responsibility is on us, right? To do that stuff, right? I mean, you can rail against the people who are going to take your time, but they're always going to be legion, right? There's always going to be way more of them than there are of you. And it's your responsibility to then say, look, I need more time with my husband. I'm not staying open. Your dog is, if you're not here in 5 minutes, your dog is boarding, or whatever. And not to be unkind to those people, because
there needs to be a boundary.
Right. Honestly, they don't know. They don't know that they're not the only person, right? So you can't really get down on them for their ignorance about that. But what you can do is say, this is the situation, and if you don't follow it, then this is going to happen. And that's what the healthy boundary is.
Well, I read this thing too, and it was like involving people who worked at daycares and about like parents who ran late all the time to pick up their kids. And you can't just be like, all right, I'm out, and like
your kid is boarding.
Your kid. Although
I've got food at home. I'm taking your kids home.
Like so often sitting on the curb waiting for my mom to pick me up. Like, it was late, like
totally.
And everyone was like, bye.
Bye.
So there was that, but
we've got kennels in the back. We'll do and food.
Kids
no
got
problem.
Gatorade. She's good.
That's it. Yeah.
No, but I read this thing and I was like, oh, it's brilliant. There were a lot of policies that these daycare centers had to. It was basically they had to incentivize where the parents would pick up, because when they would say like, okay, it's an extra $5 to the employee who's waiting there, then a lot of people were like, oh, it's only $5, then I'm going to be late every time. But they stated that it was like $5 for every minute that you were late. And so then people got there, because it's like, if I'm 10 minutes late, that's like, you're like incrementally paying a lot more directly to the person who's there to get your kid,
$50 is pretty serious.
Yeah,
exactly. To $5.
That'll incentivize them to get there early or like figure it out. So anyway.
Very good. All right. So those are our professional ones. And we're just going to go through a few more of these, and we're going to talk about how to set, actually there's only one more. Then we're going to talk about how to set boundaries and things like that. Okay. All right. So our next one is material stuff. So protecting our personal belongings and assets, right? And there are things of mine that I don't mind others engaging with. In fact, most of the things that I have, I'm not really hung up on possessions anymore for the most part. I don't have anything. There's a couple of things that I would prefer people not.
In your house.
No. And if I did, you know what? I long ago I got to the point where things are just things. It doesn't matter. They're not that precious. I have photographs of all of them. Yeah, they're not people. They're not dogs.
Yeah, exactly.
So, But when it comes to anything I consider sacred, like my altar in my house, or my spiritual texts, or the artwork that I own, that my dad was a painter and my mom is an artist as well, and so I have some personal artwork that I prefer people not to engage with. But I try, I don't like them to engage with that stuff at least until a level of deep trust is
Yeah.
achieved, right? If I trust somebody, that's fine. Yeah, do whatever you want. It's fine. I know you're gonna respect my stuff, right? But I try not to buy anything frivolous, so my money can buy things that matter, can be given away, right? And so at the beginning of the pandemic, I reconnected with my love of cooking, and so I've taken all my meals at home since then. The same with coffee, the same with entertainment and things like that. So I don't have a lot. I don't go out and I don't really acquire that much. I don't acquire that much stuff that
Right.
requires manage. I don't want to manage. I don't want to spend my life managing things, protecting things, and managing things that don't really matter.
Yeah.
In the long run. And I think a lot of people do that. That's why I've never wanted to have an expensive sports car, or like, anything or a Rolex or any of that stuff, right? You just it takes mental energy to protect and manage that stuff. And I got other stuff to do. I'll have a Timex, and if it gets broken, that's fine. Right. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah, there are things with like
thing.
sentimental value that I'm a little protective of, just because it's like my dad passed away, and some of this stuff that I have that's like that's
Of course.
just emotional to me, and
Yeah, of course.
so of course I'm gonna like protect those. But the more of the boundaries I have around material stuff is around myself. Like I set a boundary around myself, and usually what that is if there's something material. Well, first off, I'm not a shopper. I'm a buyer. I'll put it that way. Like I
Yeah.
don't just go out shopping for sport. Like
Right.
if I want or need something, it's like I get very intentional about it, and then I like seek to find that specific thing. But if there is something that I encounter that I like think I want, the boundary I have around myself is like I make myself wait 24 hours. And if I'm still thinking about it, and I'm still thinking about how it'll add some sort of value or to my life, then I'll buy it. But it's the boundary I have around myself is to wait those 24 hours so that I'm not just like impulse buying.
Yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
like when I borrow from someone, my general rule of thumb for myself is like if I borrow something from someone, I try to return it in the same condition or even better than like if that goes for like Airbnbs. Like if I'm in
Yeah.
someone's home, I deeply respect that, and
Yeah.
I always try to leave it as good, if not better, than.
It's so funny you say that. I always do that in Airbnbs.
Yeah.
When I used to stay in Airbnbs quite often, I would always try to like, I can't change the sheets because there aren't any in there, but I'll make the bed again,
Yeah,
and I'll make
exactly.
sure all the dishes are at least done or in one place if there's not a facility to do the dishes,
Right.
towels aren't on the floor, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's just basic respect.
It is. It's all just because I require that same respect, right? It's
Yeah.
like if
Yeah.
someone's extending their home, like a home is a sacred place to me, and like
Yeah.
so I make sure to honor that in the
Yeah.
ways that they want. So yeah,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I like that 24-hour rule that you have.
Yeah.
With yourself.
Yeah.
That works. Yeah, that definitely
I
works.
dig it.
If I was still buying anything, I would do that. All right, we're going to talk about now how boundaries are necessary for any healthy relationship. And I put this Paulo Coelho quote here at the top, which I really liked, which is, and this goes for the whole thing really, which is when you say yes to others, make sure you're not saying no to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's a big,
Man, I had to learn that the hard way.
that's the whole podcast right there,
Yeah.
basically. We can stop now. But let's talk about relationships and boundaries.
Yeah, it's like I said, whatever you put up with is exactly what you'll get.
Yep.
Yeah. Relationships without boundaries are codependent relationships, really. When it's like I was saying,
Yeah.
where you kind of enmesh in each other. And codependent people allow their lives to be dictated by the needs and wants of other people, and they can feel a sense of worth only when they're helping or needed by someone else. So it's like you have to be resolute in building your own self-worth and your self-awareness. And if you don't know how to create boundaries with others, then you're constantly at the mercy of others, and you spend your time and energy doing what they want rather than what you want. So
Yeah, man. I mean, yes, that's so true. I mean, thank goodness my partner and I are both pretty good at boundary setting with each other and in our other relationships as well. Our other personal and business relationships, because boundaries are such a fair way to treat people. That's what I like about boundaries so much, is it's so fair. You've made your needs known, which gives the other party sort of an instruction manual for what matters most to you, which is incredible in a relationship. I mean, so many people go into relationships and they don't do that stuff. They don't set boundaries. They don't say, it's really important to me for my own mental health or for my own sense of well-being that this happened, this, and this happens, or this, and this don't happen, then it's beautiful because you got a whole instruction manual for what will trigger that person, and also what will make that person feel amazing. And what more do you want? I mean, you want to avoid pitfalls, and you want to give as much to that person as you can because they're your partner. And there's nothing worse than playing the I wonder what's going to piss them off next game. With somebody
Funny,
who
'cause
doesn't.
I think that was the game my brothers played with me.
Right. Yeah, right. Of course. It's somebody who doesn't know how to make boundaries clear. That's that game, right? I had a relationship in my 20s with somebody who had very clear boundaries, but the problem was she wouldn't express them. So every day it was like a minefield
That
walking
was my
around,
ex.
until I fucked up. And then it was like, oh, look, somebody's really angry with me again. And I didn't even know I was stepping over something.
But that's the thing.
Right?
It's not about you fucking up, really. It's about them not
Right.
clearly communicating what their needs
Exactly.
were. But
Right.
like almost gaslighting you, right? Like
Yeah, exactly. Like, well, you should just know that.
yeah,
like,
I've been in that
no,
relationship. It sucks.
that is something people say in their 20s.
Yeah.
Like, nobody has ESPN. ESPN. Nobody has ESP,
if
man.
If you love me, you should just know. Bullshit.
You should.
Bullshit.
If you love me, you should have ESPN.
Yeah.
Yes. I was trying to say ESP man, but I said ESPN instead. Still doing it. Anyway, nobody's psychic. Just communicate your needs, man, and set those boundaries and all that.
I agree.
Right. So
I agree with that.
All right. So how do we set them?
Well, how do you know when to set them? For me,
how do you know when to set them? Yeah.
It's typically when resentment, when I'm feeling resentment, like I start
That's the key.
Like, oh, there it is. Or like overwhelm, like when I overcommit, to other people.
Yeah.
And again, it's like tuning into your thoughts and your emotions, or at least for me, it's crucial for me in order to know when I need to and where to set boundaries.
Yeah, and again, it's easy in that state because you're agitated, right? In both of those states, you're agitated in one way or another, to then seek to blame something outside of yourself right away and say, these people are messing with me, right? Or this guy kept me late at work, or that lady's doing this, or that guy touched me, or whatever it is. And a lot of the time, it's because you didn't set a clear boundary.
Right.
There, right. And if you had, then you wouldn't accept that behavior to begin with.
Yeah. And with that, you have to know what your values are.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have to know what's important to you. And if, like I said, safety is one I've learned time and time again when like I'm not feeling safe. Like safety is a necessity for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right about resentment, man. As soon as that starts to creep in, it's a real contracting feeling, and something needs to be said right then, or soon thereafter, or it's going to be, again, it's another slow drip of a different kind of poison in your heart, So it's much better to set a boundary and see if the other party is amenable to it. And hey, people may not be. That's the other thing we haven't talked about, right? We haven't talked about that yet. Not everybody is going to accept or abide by your boundaries. And then you have to regroup and think about what your next step is going to be. Because if that person is going to abide by your boundary, what are you going to do? Maybe that's a coworker and you want to keep your job and you're still going to have to be with that person. So what's going to happen there, right? You have to then rethink that, and every situation is going to be different. But there will be people who won't accept your boundaries.
Yeah, and again,
I mean, just think about trans people at work. How many people, or in their families, how often they get dead named?
Oh yeah,
right. I mean, the dead naming thing is like it's huge, and that's a very clear boundary that they've communicated with their family. My name is not this anymore. My name is this, and their family cannot get over it, and will continue to dead name them and make them feel awful. And
it sucks because that's something ultimately that's not your problem, it's a them problem, but it like you suffer under it, right? And like
you definitely suffer under it. Yeah. Well, it's not just the dead naming is the least of it, right? It's the lack of basic respect for something that you've chosen.
Yes.
Right. And that you're trying to, it's hard, and God knows hard enough to make it through the world, being a trans person, but add that on top of that non-support from your family.
And it's just, I'm sure it feels totally disrespectful. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Anyway.
Okay. How to set boundaries.
How to set them.
How to set them. There's many ways, but here are some of the ways that I put together. If you have trouble setting boundaries, you got to practice your boundary setting muscles, and by saying no, and you can start by doing that in low stake situations, right? So if you're not used to saying
that's
no,
the best.
Yeah. And like it'll help you build confidence in setting effective boundaries. So I had this practice. I was talking to an old coworker of mine, or a former coworker of mine, who was young 20-something at the time, and like many young women and girls who are raised to be like people pleasers, and not say no and feel like it's selfish to say no to other people. I remember having this conversation with her because I was in my 30s at the time and trying to say like, you can say no. And she was having like such a hard time with that. And I was like, all right, let's practice this. And I was like, Jesse, give me $500. And she was like, and I was like, just waiting for her to say no.
Right.
And so I would just keep saying like, Jesse, give me $500 until she was like, no. And I was like, all right, let's do
All
this
right,
again.
there
And I
you
would
go,
just keep
there you
throwing
go.
these ridiculous scenarios like of like asking her for something completely unreasonable so that she would say no. And also, yeah. So anyway, low stakes situations. Start with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The next thing I would say, pay attention to and get clear about your needs and values. Like we said, you have to know
Yeah.
what your needs are in order to communicate them. And if someone is infringing on that, then you need to be able to communicate what you need from them in order for them to respect that.
And that's a process, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
it really
we make
is.
it sound like it's just check in with yourself and see what your
No,
values
it's a
are. But you
practice.
have to know yourself. This is why people don't set effective boundaries until into their 30s, 40s,
Yeah.
50s. You know, do they really set, because they know who they are more, right?
Yep.
In your 20s, it's harder to do this because you don't really know who you are yet or where you're going.
Or you
know?
have a sense, but you're learning that.
All to say, take it easy on yourself
Yeah.
because it
It's
takes
a
it takes
practice.
time to determine that stuff. It's a practice, like
practice.
everything else that we talk about on the
Exactly.
show. It's all a practice, right? Yeah.
Next one is remind yourself that setting boundaries is an act of self-care and not a rejection of others. Let me say it again.
Bingo.
Remind
Huge.
yourself that setting boundaries is an act of self-care and not a rejection of others.
Yep.
If your no pisses off some other people because you're practicing self-care, that's a them problem. That's not a you
That's a
problem.
them problem.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Understand that you're only responsible for your own emotions, not other people's. If your boundaries upset others, again, them problem. Practice, observe,
Yep.
don't absorb. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Practice.
These are great, Nora.
you.
This is a great list you put together. These are great. Yeah.
I've had to learn the hard way in many ways.
Yeah. I can tell they're so specific.
Practice expressing your own opinions and needs in private and or in supportive environments, especially if you tend to be conflict avoidant. Like I said, a lot of women I know are conflict avoidant, and it's like you need to feel safe again.
Yeah.
It'll build
Yeah.
the muscle
So-
for you to eventually express them in the public sphere. So
Yeah. So what are the situations where you would, like you said, women do that? What situations do they do that under? And with each other, like in friendships?
yeah,
and
I
things?
would say
Or
again, even like in a supportive environment. When I was talking to my former coworker, that was like that was it's practice time. So yeah, or even like if you're close to your family or sisters or brothers or whatever, like people
Or in therapy.
or
You can do it in therapy.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's a great one.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's your hour.
Yeah,
You're paying for it.
that's
You can say whatever you want.
self-care.
I asked my therapist yesterday, is it okay if I read you this thing I wrote? I'm like, wait a minute.
This
Yeah,
is
it's
my time.
okay.
I'm paying you for it. Of course it is. Yes.
I mean, she was about to call me on it anyway. She's like, why are you asking my permission? It's so funny. I'm such a
Let's get
people
into that,
pleaser.
Paul. Why are you
I
asking?
know. I'm such a people
I
pleaser.
get
That's
it.
why.
I'm like a recovering
So
one.
that's why.
Oh,
Is it
yeah.
okay if I do that?
I totally
So
get
funny.
that. All right.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to shed the guilt of prioritizing your self-care if you feel guilty about that. You can it's the whole like you can put the oxygen mask on first before you put it on other people. Like that
Yeah.
that whole thing. That's like something I had to learn. It took time to learn, but I'm learning that more and more because I was the overcommitted yes to everything and like didn't want to upset other people or make them feel like they, their needs didn't matter, but often at the cost of my own. So without knowing that I was doing that to myself. So yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last one I put together was remember that people need to earn your trust before sharing your TMI moments. So there are a lot of people I know that think that they're connecting and being vulnerable, but they haven't vetted the crowd, whether that crowd or the people in their life deserve their information or their vulnerability. So that is absolutely one. Anyway, those were
Well, man, that's terrific.
You have
I don't
any to
really
add?
have anything. I don't think I really do. Unfortunately, those were great. No, I love every single one of those. No, they're terrific. The no thing, I would move number 2 to the top, probably. Like, pay attention and get clear about your needs and values, like before anything else,
Yeah,
right?
you
It's
have to.
always, I think in every podcast we've said it's all about awareness, but it really is all about
It really
awareness,
is.
right? So you have to get aware of what means the most to you and what sinks you, right? What makes you spiral, what triggers you, all that stuff.
Yeah.
and then go from there.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about later in the show. We're going to talk about how you can overdo that too,
Right.
and what results from that. But for now, let's going on to knowing how and where to set boundaries.
Yeah. Here are a few of the emotions that I experience when I recognize that I need to set better, clearer boundaries. Anger
Yeah.
is definitely one for me,
Yeah.
unfortunately, for all of us who are involved in those angry situations. Overwhelm, that's another one. It's usually I'm
Yeah.
overextending myself. Resentment, burnout, anxiety, frustration. Whenever I'm aware I'm experiencing any of these, I typically ask myself, especially the anger thing. When I feel anger, it's, what boundary has been crossed is the first question I ask myself. And that way
Yeah.
I know like what I need to get clearer about. And
Yeah.
then I ask myself, what's the best way to communicate that new boundary to someone? And often it's just straight up telling them, I need you to XYZ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, often, if it's not, I try to keep it not as non-confrontational
Yeah,
as
of course.
possible too. Like I say, like, look, Bob, there's this thing that happened yesterday when we were here or whatever like that. I really can't have that. I can't have that kind of energy happen around me.
Sure.
Again. And so I'm going to need to set a boundary around that. I hope that you understand, but it's for my own mental health. It's not just about, what happened, but
Yeah.
I'm not apologize for
No.
it, but just try to be kind. Try to be kind.
I'll
for it.
say too, though,
Yeah.
I'll say that as women in the world, I think a lot of people do not expect women to be direct. They mistake women who are being direct with being or direct and assertive about their boundaries as being confrontational. And those are
Yeah.
two different things.
Oh yeah,
I often
very,
will get
very
very
much.
direct, and like if someone starts to take offense to that, I will literally say to them, "I am being direct right now." And like,
Yeah.
this is not me trying to be confrontational. I'm being direct, and if you can't handle that, that's a them problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
for
again,
sure.
this is all being said, especially as a woman in the world. Communicating this in these particular ways also depends on how safe you feel.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent way to check in with yourself, what you were talking about, and make a step toward correcting the problem instead of taking on a victimized role like I was talking about before, and the kind of wallowing in the mud of your own creation. I think we need to check in. We as people need to check in with our feelings more in general. I mean, it's always my feeling, instead of being tossed around by them, because when you can bring your awareness to the why of the problem, you can take, what the Buddhists would call right action to fix it, right? That's different from the random action of hiding from the problem or seeking an external fix like retail therapy or a next Netflix binge or whatever. Those things just postpone the problem, right? Sincere inquiry coupled with right action, on the other hand, cuts to the chase and allows you to work with your feelings with compassion and wisdom while not getting generating any further suffering for yourself or others around you, right? Clear boundaries in this case are part of that right action. Right action for the uninitiated, by the way, is part of what the Buddhists call the Eightfold Path. And one aspect of right action is responding to what the present moment calls for without what they call vexation, right? So having equanimity about it, having a settled mind about it. Right action also shows up in Hinduism and Jainism, but it's sort of a different flavor to it there. But I just thought I should explain for people. It's a weird thing to say.
I dig when
you should use right action without explaining it.
No, I dig when you go into the different sects.
Yeah.
SECTS, not SEX.
All the different sects I have. Okay. Shall we? I have a lot of sects, Nora. SECTS.
All right.
Okay. All right. You might continually need to change your boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Okay. People change and you can totally move the goalposts on your boundaries, right? As long as you clearly communicate that to everybody who it makes sense to, right? Maybe you've outgrown a boundary, or maybe you've discovered something new about yourself that leads you to set a new boundary. And you have to allow space for your own evolution in this whole process as well, right?
Yeah.
They come and go.
Yeah, and like people can evolve or devolve, and so your boundaries
Yeah.
can, change around that. I can imagine like if you have boundaries around someone who is like an addict and they go into recovery and they actually change themselves, your boundaries can change with that, and
Right.
same with people who, maybe if they're good to go and then they become an addict. Like you
Right.
those are great examples. But
Or just something traumatic happens to you, and you're like, "Wow, I need to set a boundary about that not happening
it doesn't
again."
always have
Or
to
at
be
least
about the
that
other
happens.
people, right? Yeah, it can
Right?
be about
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you're
It can be about
experiencing.
yourself. Yeah.
There's this story I was listening to Brené Brown talk about, and she was talking about how and boundaries are necessary in all relationships, but in particular to remain compassionate. And
Yeah.
in her research, she was trying to like figure out what the universal thing was for compassionate people, where they
Hmm.
can remain compassionate. And she found she was talking to like there was a people in this particular church that were giving. There was like a couple that was giving like a lot of diapers and all these different things that were needed to this couple that were, I think, who were addicts that had children.
Hmm.
And they kept giving and giving to this couple, and the couple who were addicts kept kind of squandering it. And so it was
Hmm.
breeding a lot of resentment. And then there was another couple who were able to remain compassionate, but were very like firm with their boundaries. And she found
Hmm.
that in her research, across the board, the thing that the most compassionate people had in common, like she would ask, like, what do you think that was? And some people were like, a belief in God or whatever it was.
Hmm.
She was like, no, the thing that kept people compassionate in their relationships were firm, clear boundaries.
Mm.
So the
Mm.
the couples that were able to extend compassion to like the addict family and not breed resentment had boundaries around what they were willing to give and what they were not willing to give, including their
Yeah.
time and what of their energy and what of their material goods. And so
Yeah.
that really stuck with me. It was like if you want to remain compassionate in your relationships, then you really need to get clear and firm about your boundaries with people.
Yeah, for sure. That actually leads me in great to this next section that I call terms and conditions, which is something that, it's not. I thought it was just a nice container for talking about how to set and maintain boundaries so you feel good about them and feel good about yourself, right? So, here's what terms and conditions are, in my opinion, right? This is not a scientific thing. This is just something out of Paul's brain, right? But we often hear those two words associated with like sales contracts read at 300 miles an hour at the end of a radio commercial, right? About this fast. Right? And there you go at the end, right? But that's not what we're talking about here. So simply put, your terms are your unalterable, ironclad statements which you live your life by, right? Which is like a boundary, but I like terms better because they're more affirmative. They don't sound like I don't allow this. Rather, I do allow this. And I'll give you an example here. So some statements, they're the statements by which you live, right? So some sample terms might be, I tell the truth. I participate willingly in house management. I play board games with my friend every Tuesday. I say no when I mean no. Having terms like that, it helps a lot in your day-to-day decision making and makes you feel like you have more agency in your life, because when you're faced with a quandary, you just refer to your terms. Like, does that fit with my terms? And if you don't have a term for a quandary you're experiencing, you make one, right? Now, conditions are different. Accepting conditions that run counter to your terms is an excellent way to build the resentment we're talking about and feel like you've compromised yourself, right? Repeated violation of your terms, either from within or from without, from somebody else, that is to say, whether you violate your own terms or you relent into somebody else's request, can make you bitter and dejected about as fast as it can. Having said all that, not all the conditions are bad, though, right? Some can be quite useful. So some sample conditions might be, I tell the truth. That's the term that we talked about before, but only if it won't hurt somebody's feelings. And that's an unhelpful condition, right? Because you are going to compromise one of your main terms right there by sticking that condition on it, right? Whereas you could do the same one, right? I tell the truth. That's the term. And I'm also sensitive to people's feelings. That's a helpful condition. That doesn't say you're not going to tell the truth if somebody gets upset about it. That's just going to say you're going to be compassionate to that person, at the same time. So as I go through these, you can think about the different ways. What could there be a helpful condition to that? So like, I participate in house management. There's the term. Unless I'm tired is the condition, right? There you go. I play board games with my friends every Tuesday. That's the term. Unless my partner's stressed out and needs me to stay home. That's the condition, right? And so on. I mean, you get it, right? And the more you violate these conditions of your own, these terms of your own, the more resentment. It's like that slow drip, though. You don't really notice it happening at first. You're like, okay, well, this Tuesday I'll stay home. Right. Or I'll leave the dishes in the sink overnight because I am really tired today, or whatever it is. That repeated violation of those, it wears on you after a while, and you end up like you don't have any terms anymore, really. The other problem is that most people don't even know what their terms are, like we talked about, right? And if they do, they don't express them, like we've talked about before. And then if they're violated, leaving everybody around them to guess what's going on with them, then that's not good either. It's way better for me to make a list, review it, and make sure that my terms make sense and don't hurt anyone else, and then let the important people in my life, like my partner, know about them and ask if they see them as reasonable and workable for them. Because when you're talking about having a relationship, and I'm sure you go through this with Kevin, I mean, you talk about things like this. You just don't set a hard boundary where you're like, Kevin, this needs to be done here.
No,
I mean, you can.
that's like a drill sergeant, though.
Right, but you also say, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I feel that I need. Does that make sense to you? That's the way you need to approach somebody like that. So in a couple, knowing the other person's terms is a huge step toward domestic harmony. I think like. One of my partner's terms is that she keeps a clean kitchen, including the set of family silver that she uses. And I don't use silver. I use the cheapest silver, whatever it is, right? But, and she polishes that silver and she puts it in, not to be fancy. She just likes it.
Is it like a family?
Yeah, it's family silver. And she doesn't keep it in a case. She throws it in the drawer like everybody else. But it's a thing for her, right? And so I don't know much about silver because I don't use it, right? So I did learn, however, if you eat avocados with a silver spoon, it tarnishes the silver faster if you don't clean it right away.
Right.
And so, that was an early boundary. It's a silly boundary. I mean, it's not silly. It's something she cared about. But it's a small boundary that she set with me really early. Like, hey, I need you to clean avocado spoons as soon as you get done eating that avocado because I don't want to be polishing this every week.
Clear.
I'm like, okay, clear boundary.
Right.
And guess what? We've never talked about avocado spoons again after that because I can be taught. Yeah. That's the other thing. I can be taught, And having said that, it's totally fine to change terms when they no longer work. Get a new set of silverware, different term.
I like it. I like that silverware thing though. That's like I'll be paying more attention to that in your
own avocado eating career.
I love the way that the whole framing of terms and conditions though. It's pretty brilliant, Paul.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to refer to it because I like it better than just saying boundary because a boundary sounds like something that you're setting for the outside world, and the terms are more things like you're setting them for yourself, even if they involve the outside world. I like that. Not to say that the word boundary is not useful too, but just a different way to think about it. It's just the way I think about it. Okay.
All right.
Let's move on.
We have no is a complete sentence. Oh.
No, we touched on no before in your little training with your coworker, but this is probably the biggest boundary setting revelation of my life. I think I have serious people pleasing tendencies.
I'm a recovering people pleaser.
Totally. Yep. And I always want to help others as much as I can. And when I was younger, that resulted in me agreeing to a lot of stuff that I didn't want to do and then being disappointed or resentful that I'd agreed despite my better judgment. Or if I hadn't agreed, I'd try to justify my refusal to whoever it was that asked me. And what a waste of time that energy. Justification is. And energy. I mean, no is just no, man. It's complete. Nothing more needs to be added. And I don't owe anyone an explanation as to why. And that sounds harsh, right? But if it does sound harsh to you, it might be time to think about the people pleaser in you and whether or not they could benefit from a little more of this as well. You know?
I think that if you're not okay with just saying no and having that as a complete sentence, you might be able to. It seems a little buffery if you say no, I'm not able to do that.
Oh yeah, that's good.
Just like you don't have to quantify why you can't.
No, and it sounds a little weird too. No, I'm not able to do that. It sounds like a little bit Data on Star Trek, so I'm sure they're disarmed by it. They're like, oh, okay, she is unable to perform that program at this time. Wow, okay.
As you're doing the robot,
Throw them off with weirdness. I like it.
Yeah, it took
Weird phrasing.
It took me a while to get comfortable with no, because I'm a recovering people pleaser. Because I think I associated no with being selfish, like I was being like selfish with my time or my energy. And if it's like if saying yes to someone else is a no to you, that's a huge red flag. It just breeds exhaustion and resentment. And, I've learned I never need to qualify my no as well. And if someone is pressing me to why I've said no to something, I usually will not qualify why, because as I've learned, it's typically a tactic for someone to test my boundaries and to manipulate the situation in their favor. Which is not cool. That ends up like getting me pissed when I find people who are like, if they ask me something, I'm like, no, I'm not able to do that, and it's like, well, why? And a lot of times I'll just say like, why do you want to know? And I won't answer their question because again, it usually is like, well, if I were to say in the past, like, I can't do that because I have X to go XYZ, and then they'd be like, well, you can come 10 minutes beforehand and figure. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no,
Oh man,
like,
I hate
I
that.
hate it
Yeah.
because then I just
Yeah.
resent them. I get
Yeah.
pissed, and it's just the resentment
Yeah.
is everything in the
No,
signifier.
it's the same. I had this happen to me yesterday. In fact, somebody emailed me, "Hey, you ever think about doing this in your store?" I own an antique
Mhm.
store, for those of you who don't know. And I was like, "Nah, it's not really something I want to spend my time on, or that I have the budget
Right.
for." And then they came back with, "Oh, but you could do it this way.
No.
Oh, but you could do it that way." I'm like, "No,
Right.
no, please stop texting me. I'm not going to do
Right.
that.
Right.
I
Yeah.
just hard boundary
And it's
there.
also it's impossible to show up for everyone all the time, like in that way,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
overcommitting to spare someone else disappointment at your own disappointment. That's just like you're gonna burn out. And
yep,
I found
yep,
if it's not a hell yeah for me, then usually it's a no.
yeah,
If it's like a maybe, then that's usually a no.
yeah.
Like
I call it the full body
yeah,
yes. Like
exactly.
when I feel the yes go through my body, then yeah,
That's a
absolutely I
hell
should
yeah.
do that thing. They the Buddhists would call it inspired
Yeah.
action, right? It was you don't want to take action unless actually I'm not even sure that's Buddhist. I've been reading so much different stuff lately, but anyway, there's one of the traditions we call that inspired action, and you don't really should not take any action unless it's an inspired action, which I take as a full body yes to whatever is being asked of me.
Yeah, I found that like the more I get intentional and become more aware when I check in with myself, whether it's a hell yeah or not. Like when
Mm.
the way I've been leading my life is like really checking in, is this a hell yeah? And my life has gotten so much, so much more joyful. So
Yeah,
much more joyful.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's really the North Star for me at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that in my partnership
Yeah.
too. I'm like, if it's not a hell yeah for both of us, then we're not
Yeah,
going. Like,
exactly.
yeah, we planned to go to Point Reyes the other weekend, and it got kind of rainy on Sunday morning. I'm like, is it still hell yeah? She's like, nah,
It's
it's
a
I
maybe.
guess.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's maybe. And I'm like, no, let's
Yeah.
not go. Let's
Let's
just
just
let's
chill.
figure out what
Right.
we're gonna do at home. Yeah,
Exactly. That's a
we
hell
had a
yeah.
great day. We had a great
That's
day.
awesome.
'Cause I mean, thankfully we agree on most things anyway. But it's great to check in and like that and
Absolutely.
say, is it a hell yeah for you? No, it's not a hell yeah for me. Well, let's do something else then. I'm not married to any one thing that we do. I don't have like fear of missing
The
out at all.
FOMO.
I don't have
I know the
FOMO at
older I
all.
get, the
No,
less
not at
I'm
all.
phone. The more I'm like JOMO, joy of missing out.
Joy of missing out.
Exactly.
100%. Jomo is it.
That's so
Yeah.
funny. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, Cat's got a T-shirt that says
Oh, I
Jomo on
love
it, by
it.
the way. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
love it. I need
All
one.
right.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's move on to building trust to establish new boundaries. All
You
right.
got it. Okay.
Number one, open communication. Essential. It's essential.
Yeah. Talk about it,
Yeah.
people. Talk about it. Oh my
I think-
goodness. Don't hide it.
Yeah,
Talk about it.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
again, get to know your own needs. Communicate those
Yep.
needs clearly and concisely. Like
Yep.
there's no dancing around stuff. Just like let people know where you are and why. Like you don't even have to know
Yep.
why. Just let them know where you are and what you need.
Yeah. Yep.
Define what is and is not okay with you, like as they come
Yeah.
up, and establish consequences for boundary being crossed. And like stick to those consequences. And that includes like you can see that with children. It's like parents can be like, if you do the specific thing that I'm putting a boundary around, then the consequence will be this. And like if you don't follow through, the kid is just gonna keep doing that. They're
Right. Yeah.
so yes.
Or like, if you're in an argument with your partner or something like that,
Mhm.
as soon as name calling starts, the conversation's over,
Yeah.
right? Until we can calm down and not, or personal attacks, whatever you want to,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. Hopefully it never gets to that
No.
point, but if it does, I mean, that's a good boundary to
I've
have,
literally
right?
had like
we're-
conversations with someone where I'm like, I've said to them, if you continue talking to me with your specific tone of like yelling at me, then I'm hanging up
Yeah.
the phone. And when they
Yeah,
did, I
yeah,
was just
yeah.
like, okay, click, like,
yeah,
not gonna
yeah,
do
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. No
Not,
remorse.
no
You set the
remorse.
boundary.
Yeah, I
There
let
it
you
is.
know.
There
This
it
is my
is.
boundary.
Yep.
Honesty, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, going back, mutual respect. If
Yeah.
they respect your boundaries or not, do they treat you well? And if they don't, then peace out, homie. Like,
Yeah. I think it's important though, like that mutual respect thing. I just want to restate again, like when you go into these things, I try not to ever go into them with any animosity
course.
in me. It's hard to though, because if somebody triggered you or something like that, it's hard to not go in with animosity or like an edge to
Yeah.
you. But that's why meditation is so great, right? It's like it gives me that pause in between input and output where I can say, all right, this person probably didn't. There's not malice
Right.
in there, right? What's that quote that's ascribed to Napoleon all the time? Like never ascribe to malice what can be explained by
Yes.
stupidity or ignorance, right? One of
Ignorance,
the
really,
other,
but
right?
yeah, stupidity
Ignorance,
too.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yes.
yeah. But ignorance. In this case, ignorance. But it's really important for me when I go in and I do that. That mutual respect is really there. Like, this is another person I'm talking to. I'm going to set a boundary. I don't need to do it in a super harsh way.
Yeah.
Usually I can just say it and then see what
Yeah.
happens after that. And then if it's not respected, then we can have a conversation.
And like I said,
you know,
being direct is not always harsh. And I'm not saying that you're saying that, but like,
Yes.
don't mistake
No.
when someone's direct with you as if they're being harsh with you, right? And
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
those are two different things.
Yeah.
Okay, the other is establishing if the other person's behavior is like dominating or manipulative or invasive, and if they are, they don't deserve your time and energy. Hard boundaries need to be set. Then, like that's
Yeah.
I am super sensitive to when people are being manipulative, and even in like quote unquote beneficial ways. And I hate that. I hate that shit.
Yeah, and these are the people who are probably going to not respect your boundaries going forward either.
Yep.
So I mean, yep.
Another way to establish new boundaries is sharing your personal limits. And then last one I came up with fostering psychological safety in order to be vulnerable. That's again, it's like building trust in the people around you to know like what you can share, how vulnerable you can get with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any to add, Paul, or
no? Another great list, Nora.
I love a list.
I love that. No, I love that. No, it's absolutely everything on there is like a hit out of the park. I love that list there. Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to add that thing about the animosity in the middle of it, but that's just me. That's the way because I think I would. That's the other thing about me is like my old me would go in hot, right? I mean, there's some, I had kind of a hair trigger around some stuff, that was before I started really dealing with my trauma and therapy and things like that. So I'm very conscious of what energy I bring to things, even boundary setting like that, like the energy you were talking about before. And I want to make sure that the other person doesn't feel, even if they're the person that I need to set boundaries about, that they don't then feel attacked. Right. I mean, I don't want them to raise their animosity toward me. I don't want to get into a conflict situation. I just want to make a clear statement and have them say, yes, I can see that, or no, I don't see that, one or the other, and then we can talk about it. But I wanted to talk about the sort of the dark side of boundaries now, which is boundaries as avoidance, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I think it may be useful here to look at it, which is, a boundary, an unhealthy boundary, which is just the avoidance of the unpleasant. And sometimes I think that we set what we think are boundaries when in actuality we're just avoiding unpleasantness, which means we've attached to pleasure, and these actions don't really make us feel any better. And like as the old saying goes, what you resist persists, right? And so when we set a boundary that's rooted in avoidance, it doesn't really do anything except to push us deeper into that avoidant behavior and justify it by calling it a boundary. Like, for instance, if I were to set one of these avoidant boundaries, it might sound like this. I might say, like, I don't give money to unhoused people because they'll just spend it on booze and drugs, right? And what I'm actually saying is I care about people deeply, and it pains me and makes me feel guilty about my own good fortune when I see another person suffering. And in order to get away from those feelings, I need to distance myself from the experience of that pain by justifying my actions through demonizing their behavior and making them undeserving in my mind, and you can see this kind of thinking everywhere, and it has neither solved the housing crisis nor made anyone feel better about themselves or the world, really, right? We need to see and acknowledge human suffering when it's presented to us, not just human suffering, but animal suffering, any kind of suffering when it's presented to us. And we avoid that. We avoid that like crazy. We do all kinds of things to avoid seeing suffering, right? Including just ignoring it, But it is reality. And if we're serious about living a life of compassion and peace for ourselves and others, then we have to be willing to look at the other side of those two things and acknowledge their existence so we can work toward mutually beneficial solutions, around it.
That's deep, Paul.
Yeah.
I haven't really...
Hey, I'm a deep dude.
You are a deep dude. I'm deep like a puddle.
Yeah. But I mean, it's just... the reason I put that in is because it's something I'm working on. I've done a lot of work around that type of thing.
It's interesting. Because you've kind of laid that out like that, I'm going to be paying a lot more attention. I'm going to be building self-awareness about when I do that. I'm sure I do.
Yeah.
I'm sure we, like most of us do. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
I think there's also another thing to say here is that there's a difference between a boundary and a wall. And you can easily isolate yourself behind walls.
Ooh.
And so, I mean, that's like setting like so many boundaries that nobody can get
Right.
to you at all. Like there's no, there's no,
Connection.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
softness
There's a
to it at
disconnect
all.
there.
There's no connection
Yeah.
at all. It's a disconnect. Yeah. And with, so many things triggering so many people in this like weird media digital 24-hour landscape that we live in, it's real easy, I think, to mistake a wall for a boundary.
Oh yeah.
And like, and just armor yourself up, which closes your heart, which is the opposite of what you
Yeah.
want to do. Boundaries are there so you don't have to think about those things all the
Right.
time. So you can keep your heart open all the time because you have these boundaries in place so you won't get hurt.
You know what? It's
Right. But if you just build walls, then you
You just
close.
gave me an idea because when I think of boundaries, I think of like putting up like a fence or something like that. But you know what?
Yeah.
Like maybe a wall is one thing, and boundaries are more like guardrails. They're
Yeah.
like the bumpers where it's like, nope, you got to go this way in order to get to me. You know? I
Yeah.
don't know.
I like
Yeah,
that.
just
Yeah.
thought of that.
They're the little the little drunk
Yeah,
bumps on the side of the right? Yeah, on the side of the thing.
exactly. It's
Oh,
part of the course
yeah.
to get to.
Back
Yeah,
on the road.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
All right, let's move forward. We got
Yes.
opportunists and manipulators, i.e., bosses,
Mm.
children, bad partners, salespeople, using guilt and wear down techniques.
Man,
Oh,
this just gave me a pain in my stomach just thinking about it, man. Because I so lived this whole thing. 'Cause I worked in Silicon Valley for like a minute, for a year. I worked down there, but it seemed like 10 years. And I worked for a startup. And in general, I really liked the CEO and stuff, but I didn't work for him on a daily basis. So, I believe in a world where people are basically good, and there are certainly those who will try to take advantage of your time and energy to benefit themselves at your expense. So I worked for this software startup, like I said, back in 2015, and the culture was nuts there. I mean, everyone was expected to be available by Slack or text at
all
like
times,
any
24,
time,
like you're a
like any
surgeon.
time.
Yeah,
I mean, I used to get Slack messages up until like 11 o'clock at night. That's just insane, right? I mean, serious boundaries were necessary with that company. And even though I made mine clear, I only lasted a year because they were constantly being ignored especially by a couple people there. And the culture was so steeped in workaholism and grinding and Silicon Valley BS that I had to either get out or go crazy. I mean, I'm an artist. I didn't belong there to begin
right.
with. I needed the money, and I was trying to find my next thing, and the CEO was nice, but man, what a nightmare that was. But it was a great lesson for me about what I was willing to accept in my
Right.
life.
Right.
I mean, that was it. I said, "Oof, I know I'm not going to accept that again."
Yeah.
Boundary, from then on.
Yeah, the grind culture, man. I'm not into it. I know most people are not,
No,
or actually some people are, but like the whole, go.
the whole hustle
It's the thing, like,
thing. Like,
especially in America, if
yeah,
all of us are hustling 24/7, and we are just, what are we hustling for, right? Like, is it for us, or is it for someone else to benefit, and like at the cost of us, right? And I don't know. I just refuse. Again, there's boundaries that I set around my time and my
yeah.
energy and all that stuff.
It's interesting though, when you live in a place where money is
Yeah,
God, and where all this, and where the grind and hustle culture and cancel culture and all that stuff is so prominent. As soon as the boundaries can be lonely, because
yeah,
if you set boundaries against that stuff, then you're operating outside the
the
cultural
system.
norm,
Yeah,
right? Which is where I live all the time, and so I've become rather comfortable with it,
right.
right? But it can be really disconcerting for somebody who's been steeped in it, and then all of a sudden says, "Oh, what am I doing?" People have these wake up moments where they're just like, they just have this spiritual awakening, or just an awakening in general, and go, "What am I
Yeah,
doing?"
mine was my
That's what
diagnosis.
happened to me at the software.
Right. I,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I think I told you this is like when right before I was diagnosed, I was going through with cancer. If you're just listening in now, I was diagnosed with
yeah.
cancer in 2015, and as all the medical appointments were unfolding and all the signs were pointing that like Nora probably has cancer. I still remember I was living in Chicago at the time, and I got off the train to go to the work. I worked at the Sears Tower and yada yada yada. It's like corporate culture. And I remember getting off the seat off of CTA off the train, and I was walking through the loop at rush hour, and I was watching everyone like
Hmm.
beeline to their cubicle jobs and stuff and to chase the money. And I just remember having this like huge revelatory deeper understanding of like, oh, all of this is bullshit. Right? Like it
Uh-huh.
was like I was sitting there, I was like, oh my God, I could be dead in a year. And if this is how I'm spending my time, like from here on out, of course we all have to work in a capitalist culture. I
Yeah.
get that. But if I like resolved then to not ever just chase money for the sake of chasing money. Like that, it
Yeah.
wasn't about chasing money. It was about just trying to figure out the most joyful way for me to meet my needs and my desires in a way that didn't just sacrifice my soul, essentially.
It's so funny that you say about that awakening moment, because I was listening to a podcast yesterday that had Pete Holmes on it, one of our comedians that we listen to, and he's a very spiritual comedian. Check him out if
Yeah.
you don't know him, Pete
He's
Holmes.
great.
And he wrote a great
Comedy Sex
autobiography
God or
and stuff.
something like that, or
Comedy
Yeah.
Sex God is
Yep.
the name of his book. Yeah. But he was on a podcast, and he was talking about this very thing, which is like, and what he called it, I love this. He calls it dying before you die.
That's what it felt like
Because
for me.
because the last part of people's lives, when they've been diagnosed with a terminal disease, or the last couple of weeks of their life, you know, they as soon as that diagnosis hits, they realize it's all bullshit. Everything that everybody is counting, right? And so Pete Holmes was making the point, like, you need to die before you die, so you can live that way now, right? You can. I mean, we're all dying, so
It completely informed like how I live my life now, right? It
Yeah.
really was the moment that, like, it was the pinpoint of where like I shifted so much about how I live my life and who I surround myself with. And it's again, if I found myself sitting in that corporate chair of where I was, it was a software company, yada yada yada. I remember thinking, like, after I had finished chemotherapy and like gone through my surgery and was just like months of just hell, and being back at work, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, there's no freaking way I can do this. Like I thought
Yeah.
to myself, if I had a recurrence several months from now, I would be so pissed at myself for sitting in this chair. And I was like, I gotta
Yeah.
change this. And so I did. And
Yeah.
you know, with the help of my husband Kevin, thankfully I had him. But yeah, it was, again, I acutely understand what that means. It really felt like the death, like there's the before cancer and after cancer, Nora, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And to say, I didn't have a diagnosis, but my spiritual awakening was
Right,
the
and I
same.
hope you don't
same
have
for
to
me.
have a diagnosis in order to go.
No,
through
I hope I
that.
don't either. I hope I don't either. But
Yeah.
But you know, through psychedelic therapy and through therapy in general, and through my general spiritual awakening I had before that, I mean, all those things sort of conspired to make everything else look pretty small. You know, in
And at the end of the day, like
stuff.
I'm sure there are very, very few people, if any at all, that on their deathbed said, "I wish I worked more." You know?
Yeah, I mean, everybody always says that too, but I think it's also important for us to say that not everybody can just stop.
No,
what
but
they're
what I'm
doing,
saying is,
you
like,
know?
when
But
you're going above and beyond and you don't have boundaries, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, right? Like,
Yeah, that's what you're saying. And also, you can work toward it.
Sure.
That's the other thing. If you can't do it now, you can work
Right.
toward it. You can work toward getting yourself free. You can get free.
exactly.
You can get
Yep.
free. All right,
All
let's bring this thing in, shall we? Okay. All right. So our first thing, we're going to bring it in for a 3-point landing here. Our first point is know your values and boundary types, right? So know yourself, know where you need to set boundaries. Is what we're saying
Yes.
there. Number one.
Next one is know your terms and conditions.
There you go. I really love the terms and conditions thing, and I know that you do too. So you can adopt that for yourself and see if it's effective for you too. But I think about it all the time in my own life, so it's been very, very good for
And
me.
then
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
the third one here is
Yes.
practice. Yeah, it's just everything is practice. You know, we've been discussing boundaries here for the last hour or so, and what this is really about is self-awareness, self-respect, and self-compassion. And if we're in tune with these qualities, we can set and maintain boundaries pretty easily. You know, without them, things can get kind of muddled. You know, your self-awareness, self-respect, and self-compassion let you know that you're deserving of what you feel you need in your life, and in order to live peacefully, and that you're willing to do yourself the kindness of setting boundaries that meet those needs.
Amen, dude.
You know, and then you just practice that, practice.
And again,
practice
you're not going to be
that, you know?
perfect, but it takes, again, the practice. Like
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah, you're not going to be perfect. The people in your life that you set boundaries with aren't going to be perfect. Certainly the first couple times you set them, probably, unless they're really, really close to you. And so be forgiving as
And here's
well.
the-
Be forgiving of yourself
Here's
and
the
others,
other
you know?
thing. If your practice of setting boundaries loses some people in your life, so be it. Right?
Trimming is a
Exactly.
big deal. Trimming is a big part of
Right.
life, y'all. You know, if you're younger and you're listening to this, you're going to do a lot of trimming
Yeah.
in your life.
And that's okay.
And it's good that you do, because from that trimming comes, bigger and better
Yep,
blooms.
and authenticity,
you know?
right?
And authenticity,
Absolutely.
yeah, and knowing who you are, and refusing to compromise who you are,
Amen.
for somebody
Awesome.
else. Amen, man. All right, that's
All right.
good. I say we're
We're
done,
done.
Nora. We're done.
Hey, Paul, I love you.
Yes. Oh, you got me first again. I
It's a
love you
competition.
too. I love you too. All right. See you
See
next
then.
time.
Bye.
Bye.
Freedom over fame. Freedom over cycle stays the same.
If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything you've heard on the show, please feel free to drop us an email at ifweonlyknewthenpod@gmail.com.